The reason we are in what's called the Rolls-Royce Heritage Trust Coventry branch is friendship. And over the years, we've built up a group of people in a workshop at Anstey, which unfortunately is now closed. And over the years, we've formed into a very compact, little friendly group. And Rod here organises events like visits to museums and railways and all different kinds of places which may be of interest to us.
Well, as Ron said, the friendship is important because we've developed it over a period of years. I think by and large all of us came to the Rolls-Royce after we retired to keep our abilities, our fingertips at the ready. I mean, it was so sad to such a lot of people left, and there's no engineering left in Coventry now, and our abilities are just going to waste, so we channeled it into what Ron said is the Heritage Trust.
You see, most of us have worked on the Anstey site for 30, 40 years, and when you retire after working all those years on the same site, and sometime during that period we've come across our colleagues, we've worked together, they've disappeared off the scene, and they've come back on again. And then when we retired, we set up the workshop at Anstey around about 2001, because the Heritage Trust initially started, where did you start on it? Parkside, at the Parkside site, and gradually the Parkside was demolished. The main bunch of the Heritage Trust travel every Wednesday from Anstey to Derby. There's about 12 people at Derby today who are members of the Heritage Trust, but that started off a bunch of about 50 people 18 years ago, and they've gradually dwindled down to about 12. Ourselves, we're not all worked in the aerospace industry. Some of our colleagues have worked in the motor car manufacturing. So we found it very useful, the Heritage Trust did, to bring other ideas into the Heritage Trust, and because of that we've been able to work on both almost anything that's been given to us to work on, whether it be aircraft engines, jet engines, piston engines and motor vehicles. We have the skills amongst us to work on all these objects and keep them moving forward. One of the problems we see now is the dwindling number of people of our age, because as you can see, we don't take on any new people. There's no one. I mean, the average age here must be 80. See, so there's nobody now under the age of, say, 70 in the Heritage Trust. That is not just Rolls-Royce Heritage Trust, that's all Heritage Trusts and museums who rely on volunteers throughout the country. Because I do believe that the Motor Museum in Coventry have the same problem. We know some of our other museums, aerospace, have the same problem. They're losing the skill they're losing the skill of people to do these jobs.
I think part of it for me is keeping busy. I think as you get older, if you don't keep busy and your mind active, then you will get lonely, but more so your health will suffer.
Yeah.
And friendship helps you in your head, and physical, coming to work, we used to work at Anstey, physically to keep you going to things. So that's a part of it for me, is comradeship and friendship, and keeping my mind occupied. I wouldn't get lonely, I've got a wife, a younger wife than me, the 3 grandchildren now, no chance of me getting lonely, but I do value this experience. I enjoy mentally the pleasure that I know we were going to meet once a month until we all play it. That's my contribution, I think.
I think as the one here who has effectively has lost a wife fairly recently, it's the friendship. It's a friendship element of the group that is the great opposite of loneliness, which obviously clearly for me is felt at home, and it is good to come along, although we both have been within this group for about 10 years. So it has been extremely handy to have a group of people meeting with an engineering background that we can carry on conversations along that engineering principle. And it does help. I mean, it is one element of the loneliness problem, but possibly quite a small element. It is later in life when one of the partners has to separate is when it really comes home. And that's where Alzheimer's Society and various other societies are most useful to have understanding and compassion from. And indeed, the Alzheimer's Society in Coventry is a very active one. And I can say, you know, with the knowledge of the group there of about 6 months, it's a great help. But yes, I share the same feeling about our group as my colleagues here. You know, it's the engineering interest that draws us together, and possibly we don't think about the friendship element, but it is having a part to play, nevertheless.
In the workshop, when it was open, we met every week, and there was a lot of collaboration there, working on different projects, people with different areas of expertise, and if anyone wanted a hand doing anything, or tools being borrowed, or advice given, it was freely available across the group. And it was a great credit to Rodney, our manager, that kept it all together and ran it as a very popular pastime, really. It's a good way of filling in retirement with the workshop. I did a similar thing for just over a year at Coventry Transport Museum. We were restoring a First World War military vehicle that was made in Coventry, Maudsley. And we've worked on lots of other interesting projects in the Anstey workshop. But now that has gone, we've reverted to a monthly meeting, a lunch meeting at this venue.
I think, thinking a little more than my initial statement, and thinking back to the evolution of the Heritage Trust and how it has changed from place to place, I can now recall a few bachelors or widowers who come to the Heritage Trust and in some cases have had really no engineering background at all. And I can recall an occasion at Derby where an old chap from Derby came in to join us, and he busied himself with rearranging the exhibits and generally sort of tidying the place up. And at one point, after about 3 or 4 years, he came over to me and he said, "Do you know what?" He said, "This place keeps me alive." So this was a lonely man, and my initial statement is about friendship. Not entirely accurate, I think, that we have on occasions help people who are lonely because they have no place at home that they can join and take part in.
The talk is the biggest thing.
Talk.
Yeah, that goes. I mean, even today, the two people that we would consider lonely have gone straight home, even though we invited them to come up here. You see, they've lost a wife, they've lived on their own for many years, but they tend to want to come to all the functions we hold. But it's like yesterday, the two of them, I rang them up last night just to remind them that we were having this meeting today. You see. But it is difficult for some of the blokes, people where the families have moved away. I think we're very lucky, this group here. Most of our families probably live within a 10-mile or 15-mile radius of where they were born, you see. So as Ron was saying earlier on, it's not loneliness, it's friendship and keeping in touch with what's going on elsewhere. We are in league, we have an input into next door the MTC. We visit there very often, we organise and take groups around there. Last week we visited there with one of my colleagues, and we took 7 small exhibits for display in the workshops there, that these lads had been working on in the previous 12 months. We've also done quite a lot of work from what we call third parties. We've refurbished items and engines that are now exhibited elsewhere. In particular, the last few years we did work for Marshall's Aerospace, and what was the other one? The one at Kenmore. Well, it was the Lufthansa training establishment, and we provided them with training material. Our main group at Derby, they do the similar sort of thing. But unfortunately, they're in the throes of reorganising the Heritage Trust, and eventually sometime this year the premises which we occupy there now will be demolished and we have to move it to new premises. But each time we move, the area allocated shrinks. You could say it shrinks with the number of people in the Heritage Trust, but we do have possibly the greatest collection of gas turbine and piston engines, well, definitely in the country, possibly in Europe. And that includes rocket engines as well.
It is true to say, Rob, that the group as a whole, as well as having a friendship element, does have a compassion element, because I well remember the day when my wife couldn't be left at home,
Yes.
and you organised a vote around the group to accept her into our group with no experience of engineering whatsoever, being an artist. And
that's right. I mean, we do.
That was most helpful.
I do recognise when people have probably gone to have a problem, especially when they've had family illnesses. I mean, Peter's a prime example. The first 2 years of his wife dying, I used to speak to him at least 2 or 3 times a week because he didn't want to come out of the house. We used to keep talking to him, and he'd get into the Heritage Trust, and the chaps would talk to him, and it kept coming, but it still keeps coming. That's the chap that always sits on the end next to me. But he was a printer by trade, but he lives quite a way away, but he has no family in the immediate vicinity where he lives, you see.
So it serves two purposes. It serves the people killing them, having their time and doing something with their time, and then Rod said, people who are lonely, they come, and they're quite welcomed in, were welcomed into the situation, and sadly it all went wrong. I think there's a cause to be answered for as regards when you retire. Principally, one day you're working away there with all your mates, and the next day, bang, you're out. You're on your own. And then you've got to try and pick up the pieces and think, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do? How am I going to fill my time? And you've lost all your friends, and you're on your own. And this is the
advantage of us getting together. So we can now at least once a month, you see.
That's very lucky.
And I think women have a greater opportunity to be able to organise and be within groups because they've got arts and crafts. My wife is in the embroidery section, a stump work section, a quilting section, a dressmaking section, and that does seem to be a feature that women can take part in. But we're just old engineers, and the only thing we can do is engineering. But as a result of our being all engineers, we started off as friends about 10 years ago, was it? We were friends 10 years ago. It's now, for me, very close. These are my real mates. And that over that 10 years, we've built up this little community. And we really miss this weekly session that we can use our hands and use our brains, doing something in a workshop. And all we've got left really is this. But we're still carrying on. We're working away, we meet each other once a month, we know each other, and we like and love each other.
It's worth mentioning that within Coventry, this Alzheimer's Society, Coventry branch, has 2 meetings a month at the local church, have 100 people, couples, with one or other of the partners having Alzheimer's, and have Singing for the Brain sessions with Dave Willits, the well-known Coventry stage performer. And their compassion is the fact that they allow me to go by myself, and there are about 2 or 3 other single people there who've had Alzheimer's experience, who go along and join in with the singing and do odd jobs as necessary. So it's 3 cheers to them, but it does draw 100 odd people in twice a month, which is quite impressive. And it's only for that comradeship that they're able to do that.
Going back to the workshop, it was a weekly meeting. That gave us structure to the week. And I think we each had other things we did during the week. And you know where you are in the week. I've been to so-and-so, I'm going to the next meeting or whatever. It was very useful that way. And like Eric said, how do you fill your time when you first retire? It is quite an abrupt cessation of work.
The answer gets very obvious. Decorating and painting.
No, or the other answer is a gradual slope toward retirement, not bang straight away. Say 1 day a week, then 2 days a week, then 3 days until you come to the end.
The memory I have just come back to me. As I was growing up, people would retire. You know, everybody retired 65. And George, who came to work on his bike, was quite like really fantastically fit person, would retire and say 9, 10 months later, oh, George died. And I thought, why?
Right.
You know, why on earth did he die? He's such a fit person. And I think he just, like, I don't know, he just faded out. I don't know to this day. But this is, that wasn't one occasion, this happened on a regular basis. Somebody would leave, who was really, really fit and active, and for no reason I would ever know. I always wonder why they died. Now I think this friendship we've formed here is a definite plus to stopping that happening. We're going to die anyway. Everybody's going to die eventually. I think this is a definite preventative measure. If we're very lucky to have found each other, we're very grateful for this chappie here. And we've created it and organised it. He keeps it going.
We have another group at Derby, part of the Rolls-Royce Heritage Trust, but they've elected to go and work in a workshop at Derby. They have an entirely different ethos. They don't really talk to each other, they don't really communicate. There is no organiser in the sense that Rod plans and organises events and does a lot of work to keep it going. Up at Derby, these group of people really don't organise and have the companionship that we have. And I think that's merely because this chap here has brought us together, has more or less cajoled us into becoming a group. He just won't let us settle.
Yeah, that's right.
I think possibly the advantage I had really was the fact that I retired within a few weeks. It was decided to set up this workshop. So really I was able to transfer straight from the supervisory job I was doing previously on the site straight into the workshop. So there was no cut-off for me between retiring and picking up duties in the Heritage Trust. And as Ron said, the other half of our group do not dovetail in together. Although they've probably got the same amount of skills that we have, they seem to work individually. They will, whereas we would all our chaps would help each other with the projects, they will be on a project and they won't move around a workshop unless somebody says, oh, we need you to help us here. They wouldn't do it voluntarily. So everything was voluntary. We'd come in the morning, have a quick discussion. The lad to say, is anything we want doing today that I said, well, we've got to do this and do that. Otherwise they'd go and get on with their own projects.
We had the advantage of a small workshop. If there was a panic or crisis or an accident, not that happened sure very often, everybody would know about it instantly. Our colleagues at Derby are in such a vast area, it's about the size of a football field, and by the time we'd all dispersed to various work projects, they could easily go all day without seeing each other apart from the tea break time. But their tea breaks were not constructively used
Same anyway.
the way ours were.
But these,
Because to be fair, they have a tea room at Derby where they could assemble and they could become a community. I think what the key to it for us at Anstey was that we have a long table, chairs around it, and at tea time we all go in and usually somebody's serving tea or coffee or something like that. And we then discuss our problems, what needs to be done, like even a bit of politics comes into it. And he tells us what events are coming up, when are they going to be and where are we going to. And I'm convinced that just sitting around that table for the last 10 years has brought us together, just sitting around the table.
I spent 6 months at Derby before I got to hear about Anstey, the works about Anstey. I originally came from Anstey, I didn't know about it until somebody told me about it. But Derby's not a community. Where they have the tea breaks, it's all little tables with 4 chairs, there's groups of 3 or 4, 2 people, but each all having a discussion together. When I came to Anstey, the biggest thing I found straight away was this massive big table, and everybody sat around it. Rod sat at the top, and we talked to each other. Derby is not a community. It was boring, and I don't think I can see that Derby going to Derby contributes to anybody's life at all. But those that go, it obviously suits them. That's my opinion anyway.
well, been going up to Derby since I've been going about once a fortnight to see whether you can identify what the difference is, and I'm afraid you cannot break the mould. You cannot break the mould of them. I've tried out in the Midnight, that crew, and talking to them as a bunch of people, they'll drift away. If you start to talk to them and say, oh, I don't think I'm really interested, and instead of just sitting there quietly, if they're not interested, they just drift away. You can start with 20 people in there, and by the time you talk for a few minutes, there's half a dozen left.
I don't think we're criticising them, I just feel sorry for them a little bit. They're not getting any, I can't say they can be getting anything from it. Certainly nothing like the slightest thing like we get out of our community.
I look back to, there's probably one that would probably agree with this, is when the Heritage Trust had to move from outside to Derby. Initially they were okay because they were in a self-contained building and the same bunch of blokes working. But since then they've had to move twice, and each time they've moved, become more and more, what do you, yes, and the thing is, the last move they made, they were having to use the same workshop as 2 of the branches, that's the Uphill and the Derby branch. And then they didn't gel together, they didn't work, they never ever set out to work together. And of course ever since there's nothing drives that, there's no motivation whatsoever. I can walk in there in the morning and I'll walk through and I'll say to them, what are you doing today then? What have you got organised today? I can say to the secretary, what's organised, what's the workshop going to do over the next 3 months? Never got a clue. And that's the difference between the bunch. They always knew what we were going to do.
Yeah, we had a purpose.
Yeah.
We showed a purpose.
I think the other thing to be said is that we come from an era 30, 40 years ago at work where there was gaffers and workers, and there was a definite pecking order basically. And when I'm one of the first member of the Heritage Trust in Coventry, there was that situation where we had a number of managers or foremen or gaffers, and the other lads worked on the shop floor. And for a time we had this situation where it was a hierarchical structure and there was no real cohesion within the group. But over the years, I've tried to, and a lot has tried to, is to eliminate that gaffers and workers business. We're just mates.
Doesn't exist.
And it doesn't matter what you did before, you're a mate now and you just get, you're part of the team. And I think that has actually, because we've got rid of this hierarchical structure, has made us even tighter and a more cohesive community.
Yes, and I think that the Ron's put his finger on it there. That is the problem with Derby, because most of their committee, the Derby Heritage Trust Committee, up until recently were nearly all working managers. There was nobody that we would have called that's come directly from manufacturing on the shop floor onto their committees. And even now, I don't think they've got anyone. No, they wouldn't. No, I've seen their list recently. I know that there's no one there who's come from the engine build area or from the machine shop, unless they've been a manager.
I have to say I was a gaffer in a fairly senior management position at Parkside and Royston. So I just would not buy into that hierarchy because we were all mates and I wouldn't allow them. But there were people there, the gaffers, who wanted to maintain and keep that structure going. You will do what I tell you to do. That doesn't happen with our little group.
I've been in a few divisions actually. I was on development test in the early 50s, then moved to the planning at Coventry, and then I went into what was it? I don't remember what it was.
Should have written it down.
Yeah, should have done.
One of those big
It's a long while ago actually. But I've been in quite a few departments, and I finally left Rolls-Royce in 1973 to start a business of my own. And I'm still, retired from that, but still take a lot of interest.
Started life as an apprentice at the Standard Motor Company Coventry, went into the dynamics laboratory there, stayed with the company 40 years and finished up at Gaydon Test Centre doing vehicle dynamics, reduction of noise internally and externally of a car, and came out as a pensioner under the BMW flag, who were running that company after 13 or so name changes through 40 years.
I started my apprenticeship with Humber Limited, part of the Roots Group in the motor industry. Most of my time has been spent in the motor industry. I did 13 years with Rolls-Royce in their industrial and marine division, and worked my way up through being a draftsman, a designer, to a design engineer. And I finished my time working at the same company as David here, Land Rover. We never knew each other there. It's a large company, didn't get to, our paths never crossed. So I brought a different level of expertise to the workshop by being able to design things that needed designing, basically.
I did my apprenticeship in aero engine fitter. I became an aero engine fitter, working on Purchase engines, Olympus engines, various engines throughout the years till I was 40. Then I transferred over to the staff side, development, and I became a development support engineer. Basically, I translated what the engineers wanted into instructions to the shop floor, and then ran around doing reworks and support, basically supporting the shop floor in achieving what the engineers wanted them to do. Very interesting job.
I started my time at Armstrong Sidley Parkside in 1949. Did a 5-year apprenticeship, went into the Royal Air Force as a National Service conscript, came back, worked for a short time in engineering and development at Anstey. I went out as a £10 pop to Australia, which is a £10 journey to Australia. Came back, back into Armstrong Siddeley, which then became Bristol Siddeley, and I've worked variously through engineering and product support for all those years. Finished up as a product support manager at Anstey and finished in 1991.
Yes, well, I started, I always think I was very lucky because I think we're seeing the best in engineering in a way to put the pace on the progress. We've seen, I started by the time in there, I spent regularly in the RAF. When I came in the RAF, I spent 3 years in general engineering as a tool room. Then I came to, when it was Bristol City, onto the test side. And then spent 36 years on test and development gas turbines. During that period, we brought the engines from the first generation of gas turbine right up to present day to the third generation. So we have seen such a wide scope of engineering within the turbine industry. I retired in 2001, and then we've been doing the British Trust ever since then.
I served my time at a good old Coventry firm called Lee Francis Cars, which Coventry University is now built on. And like Ron, on Her Majesty's pleasure, called up for national service. Did my 2 years. Came out, went into, like David, went to the stand, worked in the experimental Standard Triumph. Following that, I left there and went into the experimental at Massey Ferguson tractors. And then, from there, I went into insurance. And from that point in time, as I retired. And then when I came up to Ryan and Walt, and they welcomed me with open arms. Which, when you consider I was not an aero man, quote, I thought it was excellent.
Well, I've listened to all this, and I'm afraid my little bit is virtually a fraction. I left school, got a job with Armstrong Siddeley, took an apprenticeship as a compensation metal worker, and I stopped there, right through till it became Rolls-Royce. Never worked anywhere else, and did whatever I had to do, making things out of it. And I retired after 45 years, I think, with a one firm.
Can I just say something about this chap?
Yes.
He's hiding his life behind a bushel.
He is.
Yes, he is.
He is.
He is one of the best tinsmiths in this country, quite frankly.
You want anything made, if anything goes wrong, we all say,
Anything made out of
God
metal
will do it.
sheet or copper tube
Yeah.
or tube, this is the man to go for. He
Yes,
is
yeah.
a very skilled man.
to make a Rolls-Royce out of a baked
What's
bean.
even more surprising is that he came back from death's door about
He did.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes, he
He
did.
had an accident drinking water and he nearly died. In fact, they didn't expect him to live to the following day. Look at him now. He's come back. He's a nugget, this man. The other thing I'd like to say is that this generation lived through the golden years of the 20th and the 21st century.
I think that's true.
Unemployment was, we had lived through the war and it wasn't a joke, I can assure you, because I can remember the raids in Coventry in 1940. But when the war ended, those years up until about 1980, I suppose, were golden years, and we were lucky to have worked into an industry like this, and we learned a lot. But we were lucky. It's much more difficult for young people now, we realise that. And but again, the difference is that we worked in large groups. Armstrong Siddeley at part-time was 6,000 people. Here at Anstey it was 2,500 people. The Standard Motor Company, 10,000 people. It became almost, in a sense, an homogenous group, and quite frankly kept together by the unions.
Yeah.
That's all gone. You're now fragmented. You're all individuals, but you're all fighting for your own corner, and that has given you a disadvantage, quite frankly. My daughter is working as a teacher. Her life is awful. The pressure upon her in terms of work under pressure and their own self-consciousness to perform properly and to be a dutiful teacher wears her down, and that wasn't the case when I was at school. My teacher was probably a 70-year-old man, and he didn't give a damn, quite frankly, as long as they paid him his salary at the end of each month and he could hold his cane and cane you regularly. He was happy. But the world has changed.
It has changed, and your opening statement about this day and age, everything is regulated, and that's probably the downside of it. So, like Ron, I've got a daughter-in-law as a teacher, and where she's supposed to pick her children up at 5 o'clock yesterday, it was 6:30, because she's got that much work to do off the normal school day, and that will happen every night this country. Too much regulation. People are not allowed to use their initiative. No. That's the basic problem. They can't use the initiative.
Political
Not
correctness.
just that, it's the pressure they put on individual people. And then in our day, if a gaffer tried to pressurise you unfairly, then you've got a shop steward behind you to sort things out and to stop him doing that. Now, there are no unions and there are no people to represent you and to fight your cause. And that's why my daughter is is so heavily stressed with the work she has to do. And she can't go to the shop steward and say, look, this isn't right, I really do need to re-evaluate this situation. And I do feel sorry for younger people these days.
Right, I'm Ron Sambell. I'm a qualified mechanical engineer, and I've worked at Rolls-Royce prior to starting our own business.
David Dennis started work at the Standard Motor Company, came out with an HND, and then went through all the different areas of experimental department, including game.
Martin Woolston, basically employed in the motor industry, but did a stint with Rolls-Royce, professional engineer, design engineer.
I'm Ron Frost, 85 years old. I've worked all of my life in the aviation industry, and latterly I've been a member of the Rolls-Royce Heritage Trust.
Hello there, my name's Rod Moore. I spent all my life in the RAF and working for Rolls-Royce, Bristol, Siddeley, etc. And I was test and development gas turbine engineer.
My name's Eric Devine. I served my time as a motor vehicle engineer at Lee Francis Cars, and after national service I went to Standard Triumph, where I worked in the experimental.
My name's Gordon Slack. I started work at Armstrong Siddeley, which eventually became Rolls-Royce. I worked there all my life. I was a sheet metal worker.